Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, as we read letters from the voyages of St. Frances Cabrini as she traveled around the Western Hemisphere sharing the good news of Christ. Welcome back to the end of this voyage, Catholic pilgrims. There is so much exciting stuff going on in today's reading. We've got mule rides over foggy mountains, jumps across deep chasms, drunken men, and scant food and sleep for Mother Cabrini and Mother Chiara. We are reading an adventure tale today that could totally be a movie. We do have a lot to read, but you are really going to be amazed at what a religious sister is willing to do to save souls. Let's join her on the caravan over the Andes by opening to page 176. On the 23rd of November, supplied with large baskets of pastry, fruit, wine, honey, etc., and accompanied by a number of ladies and sisters, we took train for Los Andes, a town at the foot of the Cordillera, where we were to pass the night, in order to be ready on the 24th, after having observed the feasts of the day, for the journey by caravan, which was to pick us up in a place further on. At Los Andes, we were received most kindly by the sisters called Hospitallers, to whom we had been recommended by the people of Santiago. They gave us the best room in their poor convent. The next morning, other sisters of the same order from another house in the neighborhood came to bid us farewell and accompany us in the train as far as the Chileans have been able to go, up to the present, with their railways up these great mountains, which, the higher we go, the steeper and higher they seem to run. At 11 a.m., after having heard Holy Mass and received Jesus in the most holy sacrament of the altar, who, like a valiant giant, was going to conduct us over these great heights, after having had a good breakfast, which, owing to the keen air, seemed to be more appetizing than usual, favored with the blessing of the good parish priest of the town, and accompanied by a larger company of the good sisters Hospitallers, who came in great numbers, we boarded the train along the river, which has its source in the Aconcagua. We passed through a chain of mountains in a pleasant and picturesque country, which, while presenting awe-inspiring scenes, greatly delighted the passengers. We crossed a small bridge called the Soldier's Jump, feared by everyone. It spans a chasm between two rocks of gray stone so narrow and deep that the bottom cannot be seen. One only hears the strange rumbling of the rushing waters in the fearful depths below. Certainly, if anyone had the misfortune to fall into this abyss, they would never again behold the light of day, nor would it be known what manner of death they had had. It did not make much of an impression on me, because I seem to remember having seen many of such horrifying chasms. I, however, enjoyed the impression made on these good sisters, and how enthusiastically they spoke of it as they drew near to and passed over it, and how they pitied us with regard to the rest of the journey that awaited us. Shortly after we had passed the Soldier's Jump, the train stopped, and we alighted to take our places in the coaches that were drawn up to convey the passengers. The good sisters returned by train, after having helped us to make ourselves as comfortable as possible, while we were with good mules, 6 to each coach, following always the course of the same river, penetrated into those vast gorges where only now and then a few pines of harsh color and dark green appeared. The river was swollen, and in several places its foaming waters with their milky spray made a terrifying noise. Further on, it looked as if we were going to be covered by the mountain, as a part of it appeared to fall over the river. At some points the heights were magnificent, whilst behind the mountain the river descended in the form of a precipitous cascade. Then suddenly it slackened its force and took the form of a small torrent, the waters of which seemed to play with the pebbles and amidst the enormous rocks deposited in the bed of the river. Then it widened again to thousands of bends, which we had to follow with great exactitude, as the river was our only guide along the route. Finally, after a journey of 5 or more hours, we reached Juniel, which consists of a few houses amidst the mountain peaks. This was to be our grand lodging for the night. Some arrived earlier, others later than ourselves, We were about 45 passengers who, early the next morning, were to undertake, in a caravan with mules, the journey through the most difficult pass of the Cordillera. As soon as the coaches arrived, the passengers rushed to go to bed for the night. We made our way also, but as the others were quicker, they arrived first and consequently were served first. Not knowing what to do, we went to the one who was to drive the caravan the next day, and as he inspired us with very little confidence, we were very cautious in our dealings with him. At first he was somewhat rude, but finally, at our repeated requests, he softened towards us. He told us that on the other side of the mountain, where he pointed with his finger, there were first-class apartments, better than these, where he and his wife were going to put up, and that if we went there after supper, we would find everything all right. Shortly afterward, an old man of pleasant aspect, resembling somewhat St. Joseph, said to me, "I am one of the muleteers appointed to act as guide to one of you tomorrow, and as I am going to sleep on the other side of the mountain, you need have no fear." His kind way and serious character inspired us with confidence, and so we went to table with more courage and ate of the coarse and badly cooked food and hard black bread, as if it were the most dainty food, for the air of the village sharpened our appetites in a most extraordinary manner. At table all spoke of the morrow's crossing, some of its great dangers, others of their fear of the mists which are fatal to those who are crossing the pass. Stories were also told of the frost that in some of the passes freezes the limbs, and of the atmosphere which hurts the eyes and causes the skin to bleed. A delightful description indeed! Still, with all this discouragement, I felt safe and happy, for I knew if our Lord had so far helped and blessed us, he would do so to the end. I also took comfort in the hope of meeting with something new which I could tell you, since, to myself, after 4 long voyages, everything appeared quite familiar. I felt sorry for Mother Chiara, who heard all this, and who, I thought, might have changed her mind after her departure from Valparaiso. But when I asked her which way she preferred to travel, by land or sea, over the Andes or through the Straits of Magellan, she answered, 1,000 times over the Andes rather than by sea again. So I said to myself, all is well. When the meal was over, we took a little air in the bright moonlight, which shone very brilliantly. The mountains appeared to touch the sky and seemed covered with a beautiful blue mantle, and raised us to a state of sublime ecstasy. The earth had the color of the sky, while the passes of the mountains wore a blue of a darker shade, and gave one the idea of great clouds saluting their smiling queen. And really, that night the moon in all its splendor seemed to represent to us the beauty of our queen, our Mother Mary, Pocha ut Luna, who had come to console us with her maternal look. Those who work in the Lord's vineyard from morning till night are well rewarded if, at the close of the day, they receive a loving look from her who, after God, forms the happiness of the blessed in heaven. We wanted to prepare the points for our meditation, but nature had already prepared them for us. Looking at the moon and sky, which seemed turned towards us, I thought I heard the sweet voice of Mary, with that of the most melodious voice of our dear Jesus, transporting us into an ecstasy of love. Methinks I saw the purity and holiness of Mary and the complacency of God in her. What a great sweetness, what a great joy in contemplating Jesus. But the night was advancing, and we had to go to rest, though it did not seem we should need sleep in this fine air. We abandoned ourselves to the care of our Heavenly Mother and to her messengers, who are the angels particularly destined for pilgrims. Happy and tranquil, we turned towards the shelter on the other side of the mountains. Reaching a certain point, we lost our breath. A sort of weight oppressed us, and we could not understand what it was. Then we saw the old shepherd, who resembled St. Joseph, running towards us to tell us to hasten, as we had reached the puna, a Spanish word meaning shortness of breath caused by the unstable temperature. We hastened our steps and soon reached the spot where the air was pure and bracing. It was indeed a strange phenomenon, this shortness of breath in these mountains, and if we had stopped longer, we might have died of suffocation. but the silver moon still shone in its silent language, telling us that Mary, the Mother of God, still watched and protected us with incomparable tenderness. Having reached the end, we found what we never expected to find amidst these rough mountains, a beautiful spring bed with good bedding, which the old man pointed out to us with much satisfaction and pleasure. He told us there was a key, and we could close ourselves in by barring the door. He told us also not to fear, for he would be in the stable next to the mules' stables if we needed anything, an admirable instance of God's providence, and we reposed quite tranquilly. But the night passed in a moment, and at 3:30 the noise of the shepherds preparing the mules and packing the luggage awoke us suddenly. We felt more tired than the night before, as we had had very rough treatment during our 5-hour coach drive. We mustered up courage, however, arose at 4 a.m., and dressed ourselves in long round cloaks trimmed and lined with a kind of cheap fur, which were given to us by some ladies of Chile. We looked like 2 monks, but we began to feel the cold, and these cloaks were of great service to us. We descended to the first inn where all were breakfasting, and we took our milk and coffee and hard bread as fast as we could, as everything was ready for the journey. We went out into the open and saw 2 beautiful mules with new equipment and 2 comfortable saddles. We thought they were for an opera singer and her companion, who formed part of the company, but this time we were mistaken, for the nicest mules were for us, orders having been given that they should be assigned to us by the superintendent of the Transandine Company. However, thankful we were for the favor, we were not so willing to accept it, because it meant that we were to be the first to mount the mules, and, not being experienced, we preferred to see the others do so first in order to learn the art. But we had to give in. The St. Joseph of the previous evening came forward and stood with crossed hands so that I could mount the mule. As I refused, the whole company stood around to see what was going to happen next. The poor shepherd, so good and patient, went into the house and brought me a chair, which I accepted willingly. I then mounted, placing myself in the saddle and putting my feet in the stirrup while taking the reins. I drew the mule round whilst the muleteer mounted his mule, and moving forward, made way for me. Mother Chiara followed my example, accompanied by another muleteer who, though he might not have resembled my St. Joseph, was very good also. All the others mounted their mules with much less trouble and followed us in procession. The mountain was steep, but the pass for more than an hour was lovely and smooth. It was almost a pleasure to see the long procession that appeared to be climbing with a certain devotion, as the caravan looked like a devout band of pilgrims, so it seemed to me. Taking my beads in my hand, I was about to invite all to recite the rosary in honor of the Queen of Heaven, who had so blessed the day, and all certainly would have willingly replied to my invitation, as they seemed quite pleased to have in their company 2 religious, who appeared to them, owing to their goodness and faith, to be a guarantee for a prosperous journey across the Cordillera. My project of the rosary vanished very soon, for the beaten path had disappeared and we were obliged to make our way through the heavy snow. 2 muleteers proceeded in advance, and having found it passable, shouted for us to follow their track. When we had got over one difficulty, another appeared. Afterward, we found ourselves on the brink of precipices many kilometers deep. Then I tried to keep my mule away from the edge, but the poor thing, knowing that it had an unpractical traveler in its saddle, always kept going straight, no matter how much I pulled it from one side to the other, and thus it would not obey me. When it approached too near the edge of the precipice, I shouted and spoke to it in Spanish, but to no purpose. The only thing that seemed to hurt it was when I attempted to alight. These terrible precipices almost turned Mother Chiara's head, and no matter how often I told her to sit straight, she lay like a sack of flour on the mule's back, her head resting on the poor animal's neck. Fortunately, the muleteers were more than good, and as in such difficulties one has enough to do to attend to oneself, I felt sure they would not fail Sister. Gradually, we ascended higher and higher, when from afar we heard the shout for all to alight. "Something's the matter." A great chasm caused by the melting snow was an obstacle to further progress, unless we proceeded with great precaution. There was a general alarm. The men grumbled about the imprudence of conducting the caravan by this route, and the women cried quite hopelessly. Mother Chiara remained in deep silence. She lost her speech. Certainly she now repented of having chosen the Cordillera instead of the Magellan for our journey. Her only consolation was that when she raised her head, I looked quiet and happy, as one enjoying a magnificent spectacle. It was truly grand in all its horror. We were at a height where one perceived an immense abyss on one side, whilst on the other there was a vast expanse of pure white snow, while further ahead there were heights awaiting us. But just in front of us was that large crevice, long and deep, which seemed ready to swallow us up and bury us. The muleteers, though not without fear, tried to make some of the mules jump the crevice, and seeing that it could be done, encouraged the passengers to do the same. I, as you have heard, was at the head of the line, and I was willing to be the first to go forward in order to encourage the others, for, to speak truthfully, I was not a bit afraid, feeling quite calm. My guide had his staff ready, as he thought he would have to carry me across, but I told him I could take longer jumps than the one across the crevice. He very respectfully showed me the danger, and then watched me attentively, knowing I would not fail to tell him or call him if I needed help. I jumped, or at least attempted to, but probably owing to the cold and the keen air which deprived me of strength, I realized too late that I was like a feather, which, however much it is thrown forward, does not move unless carried by the wind. And so I should have buried myself alive had it not been for the muleteer, who, seeing the danger, dismounted, and stretching his feet across the crevice, held me back on one side of the chasm until he, with the help of his comrade, sprang across to the other side, where he drew me by the arm after him into safety. The shock produced such palpitation of the heart that I thought I should have died. The good muleteer took me aside, and I fell fainting in the snow. I couldn't speak a word, and it was obvious from the frightened looks of the good man that he expected a tragedy. But this was not God's will. As soon as I was able to speak, I told him to go and help the others, and I had to tell him twice, as the need was urgent. I remained alone, stretched on that white bed of snow, and little by little, helped by the pure air, the palpitation ceased, and I was as lively as ever. I arose to find that all had crossed the dangerous pass, and that the muleteer was waiting for me to mount my mule again. We resumed our journey and arrived at a higher point where we had to go through snow 5 meters high, which had been cut through by the Transandine Company for the caravan. It was a grand sight in passing through the fortress of snow, but not quite so pleasant to myself, as I was afraid of not being able to bear the cold. They told me to keep on my eyeglasses so that the cold and great whiteness of the snow should not injure my sight, but I preferred to see where my mule went, not trusting to my eyeglasses, which I did not find very helpful. Pulling the elastic, I put them sometimes on my forehead, sometimes on my chin, but not in front of my eyes, except when I was obliged to look closely. In God's good time, we reached the Cumbre, which is the topmost height which can be crossed in the neighborhood of Aconcagua, and here we remained some time. What a majestic sight! What a charming view! We seemed to see the whole world at a glance. There we saw the boundary line between Chile and Argentine. We had said goodbye to that dear country in which we had lodged or sojourned for a month, and which, unknown as we were, had proffered us every care and attention. We wanted to enjoy the sea view, but the fog was descending, and so we were deprived of that enchanting sight. The muleteer made signs to me to mount the mule at once, but I begged him to let me enjoy this sublime and inspired moment of meditation. A little perturbed, he turned and begged me to get into the saddle. The poor man had every reason, for it was past 11, and within half an hour's time the atmosphere of the mountains would have proved fatal to us. Just about the same time, from the other side of the top of the mountain, one of those good employees of the Transandine Company arrived upon the scene, and after saluting us courteously, told us that he had orders from Santiago to come and meet us, and, if possible, to make our journey a little easier. He then took my reins and conducted my mule down the steep mountain by the shortest paths. The descent was steep and stony. I thought I should fall every moment. The mule would slip now and again. This good man encouraged me and told me we had to keep to this path in order to get as soon as possible to a comfortable hotel. We reached there at midday, whilst the snow fell heavily and the mountain had entirely disappeared in a thick fog. The landlady of the hotel received us with a motherly heart and placed us at table where lunch was already prepared and which we enjoyed, as it warmed us after the cold we had experienced. When lunch was over, they called the heads of the different families one after another to write their impressions in a large register kept for that purpose. Our companions on the journey had been very much upset when they had to cross the crevice, so you may imagine what they wrote. I, however, wrote one of my most beautiful impressions of that passage. The hotel keeper and all were surprised to see what I wrote, and said I was the first person, especially at this dangerous time of the year, who spoke well of this crossing, and more so because the writer was not a man. The fact is, I was very pleased and happy to have ascended such a high mountain, and therefore incidentally have an inducement to excite or incite myself to ascend the heights of holy perfection, a mountain much higher than that of the Cordillera. The celestial divine spouse calls his beloved with the sweet name of Columba. Una es Columba mia, delecta mia. He calls her Columba, not only because she should be gentle, meek, and mild, but because she has to fly the heights of the Lord without tiring, rising continually towards heaven with perfect detachment from earth, raising herself on silvery white wings by the purity of her affections and intentions. About 2 p.m., the coaches were ready to convey us to the station Punta de Vaca. We set out up the slopes and down the valleys. We traveled along the Mendoza River by way of a path rough and dangerous, owing to the rocks that seemed to crush us at every instant, and owing also to the breaks of the great river, which looked rather dangerous. At 7 p.m., we arrived at the Punta de Vaca, where we expected to repose quietly after the shaking we had had on the mule and in the coaches, but an hour before we arrived, the caravan from the Argentine, which the next day was to cross the Andes, had reached Punta de Vaca and had taken possession of all the accommodation. What were we to do? The bell rang to go to supper, and we took our places at table with our luggage beside us on the floor, not knowing where to place it in safety. When the frugal meal was over, I asked the innkeeper to give us a place to rest, if possible. He very courteously said he had not received any orders regarding us, but that we were not to be alarmed, because he would very soon be able to provide us with beds. In the meantime, night was advancing, and the only room in the inn was full of men drinking. At 9 a.m., I again begged the innkeeper to give us a room, and he said he would do so immediately. Half an hour later, he told me all the beds were taken except one in the hall, which, of course, I did not accept. So I turned and sat down at the table in the corner of the room with Mother Chiara. It was now 10 p.m., and the men went on drinking. The alcohol was producing its effects, and we heard a lot of movement, shouting, and singing. I then began to feel uneasy, but looking around, I saw an American gentleman from San Francisco who had crossed the Andes with us and, like us, had been unable to get a bed. I prayed him to remain near us, as I feared those men. He was the only one amongst that excited crowd who inspired me with any confidence. He felt so sorry for us that he induced the innkeeper to give us a room in which there were 2 good ladies and a boy, but the boy retired to make room for us. We called down hearty blessings on that good man and fell upon our beds exhausted and motionless till the morning. At 7 a.m., we were at the station and took train. Still traveling along the Mendoza River, we crossed new mountains and valleys, and in the afternoon reached Mendoza, the first and nicest city on the way from Chile. We were received by the Good Shepherd sisters, and it was a great relief for us to find a safe religious home after such a journey and nights of fear and danger. We visited the lovely churches of the city and then went to the Jesuits, who encouraged us greatly in our mission to Buenos Aires by the news they gave us. They told us we should have enough work to do there. We visited the Franciscans, who blessed us as sisters of the Third Order of St. Francis. Our next visit was to the Slaves of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, a newly founded institute in Cordova. The sisters received us with great kindness, and they would have kept us for a few days had we not already arranged our journey with the Argentine Railway Company. We were to leave the next night, when we would be crossing the Pampas at great speed for 2 days, and with very few stops. The Pampas is beautiful. It is an immense plain where only now and then one sees a peasant's hut, lost, as it were, in the immensity of the expanse. We saw horses and mules in great numbers, flocks of sheep and goats at pasture in all directions without a guide, in that never-ending country, the boundaries of which the owner knows nothing about nor cares to know. Now and then we could see skeletons of animals and carcasses not buried, left there, abandoned. But the train flew on without minding anything in the midst of the long, thick grass of the virgin prairies, and on December 1st we arrived at the capital of the Argentine. Now I must stop, with the promise to write as soon as I have finished my work on this foundation, when I shall return to you, and then go elsewhere, as obedience ordains. Let us live in the meanwhile, abandoned to the will of God. I shall work in his vineyard, you helping me with your prayers, in which I so much confide. Prayer, confidence, and total abandonment in God will always be our sure arms. We are good for nothing, but in God we can do all things. Omnia possum in eo quae me confortat. May God bless you, enclose you in his adorable heart, wherein resides the throne of peace and anticipated heaven. Love Jesus much, and think of nothing else. Work with great zeal for the glory of God under the banner of holy obedience. Do not seek rest on this earth, but be ready to die on the battlefield in company with Jesus, with the assurance that the more you fight, the greater will be your crown, a crown that in eternity no one can usurp. Such is the wish of yours affectionately, in the Sacred Heart of Jesus, Mother Frances Xaveria Cabrini. Whew, she made it. She made it. Anyway, as many of you know, I recently went to a retreat where I was honored to be the keynote speaker. And during meal times, I tried to sit by different groups of ladies so that I could meet all of them. One woman in particular really stood out. She was a lovely older woman who was probably a little older than my mom. And to look at her, she just seemed like a wonderful grandma. She had tastefully done blonde hair, a nice warm cardigan, and a gentle smile. As I started talking with her, I learned that she had lived a life of adventure. I mean, this lady let nothing hold her back. Her husband was active duty, and she always traveled with him wherever he was stationed. But not only that, she was a contractor for the U.S. government, and she went into some of the most dangerous countries on the planet. The stories she told us of harrowing escapes and dangerous situations was the stuff of a Hollywood movie. Not only were her work stories cool, but she had amazing stories of attending mass in countries where it wasn't safe. She'd always find some way to discreetly ask if anyone knew where the mass was being held, and amazingly enough, someone would always lead her in the right direction. Just when I thought she couldn't top a story, she would tell another one that shocked us all. Her courage and spunk were incredible. Those of us at the table listening to her asked, "Were you even scared?" And she answered yes, but said that she always trusted that God and her guardian angel would see her through. This voyage, this one in particular, with Mother Cabrini, has been a wild adventure. If you remember all the way back, she left Panama, sailed down the western coast of South America, was near or in countries where religious were being expelled or persecuted. The geography was strange, the climate was strange. Her travels over the Andes is like something Indiana Jones would do, and yet she's just a little Italian religious sister seizing the moment. She's incredible, truly. In our culture today, we are so crippled by fear. We fear mean words. We fear hearing someone disagree with us. We fear disease. We fear death. Some people fear, still, to this day, years removed from the COVID pandemic, leaving their house. People often ask me if I was afraid in Turkey. Sometimes I was, but no different than being fearful in LA or New York. Or sometimes they'll ask me if I'm afraid when my oldest daughter goes to serve on mission in Peru and Ecuador. Yes, it makes me nervous, of course, but I have to press on through that fear. Some fear is healthy, but a lot of fear is from the devil, causing us to shy away from getting out of our comfort zones or trying to preserve our lives so much that we actually forget to live. Simply existing is not truly living. What will be the story of our lives when we get older? Will we regale people with tales of sitting at home safely scrolling through social media feeds and watching the latest popular show? Or will we have tales of adventure that inspire others to be courageous and trust in God? I hope I'm like the latter. I truly hope. Because we can only bring Jesus to others when we are willing to go beyond the misguided safety of our fears. Instead, we must trust when God calls us out into the deep. That is all for this voyage, Catholic pilgrims. Soon, very soon, we will be headed to Barcelona, Spain with Mother Cabrini. But until then, live the faith boldly and travel well. As many of you know, I recently went to a As many of you know, I recently went to a retreat where I was honored to be the keynote speaker. During meal times, I tried to sit by different groups of ladies so that I could meet them all. One woman in particular really stood out. She was a lovely older woman who was probably a little older than my mom, and to look at her, she seemed just like a wonderful grandma. She had tastefully done blonde hair, a nice warm cardigan, and a gentle smile. As I started talking with her, I learned that she had lived a life of adventure. I mean, this lady let nothing hold her back. Her husband was active duty, and she always traveled with him wherever he was stationed. But not only that, she was a contractor for the US government, and she went into some of the most dangerous countries on the planet. The stories she told us of harrowing escapes and dangerous situations was the stuff of Hollywood movies. Not only were her work stories cool, but she had amazing stories of attending Mass in countries where it wasn't safe.